If you dare to play, I'll tip you a month's wage. But if it's dreadful, don't blame me for despising you." The words fell heavy, slicing through the murmurs of the room. Emma froze the violin pressed against trembling hands, dust rising like ash from a forgotten grave. The restaurant's chatter dissolved, swallowed by a silence that pressed against every chest. Then came the laugh, sharp, arrogant, tearing the air apart. Eyes turned, but no one moved. In the corner, a solitary man bent over a notebook, his pen dragging across the page with cold precision. He wrote without pause, as if sealing a verdict none could yet see. What had brought them to this moment? What path had led her a shadow in an apron to stand trial beneath a billionaire's sneer? 30 minutes earlier, the story had already begun. Her steps barely touched the floor, yet the silver tray in her hands dragged her down like a chain. The apron she wore was worn thin, its once white fabric stained by years of spilled wine and unnoticed hours. Above her, the yellow glow of the chandelier fell heavy, not as warmth but as interrogation, exposing her fatigue in cruel detail. The wealthy at their tables did not look at her, not once. They ordered without faces, their voices clipped as if she were furniture moving between shadows. Emma had mastered the art of being unseen. Her hands cleared glasses, her body wove between chairs, but her spirit was elsewhere. In quiet moments, her fingers still mapped invisible strings against the tray's cold surface, muscle memory refusing to die. The dream was buried. Yes, but like a ghost, it clung to her, whispering from every corner of her silence. She was no longer Emma, the musician. She was a shadow in uniform, a servant erased from the room's attention. Yet the weight in her chest told another story, that invisibility is never freedom, only another form of prison. Once the world had risen for her. A hall, vast and glittering, had thundered with applause waves crashing against velvet walls. A girl in a white dress stood in the spotlight, violin alive in her hands, bow carving fire into the silence. Each note had lifted hearts, had made strangers weep. She was not background then, she was the storm itself, the fragile vessel channeling something greater. Her parents sat in the front row, their faces lit with pride brighter than the chandeliers above them. Every victory had been theirs as much as hers. They believed the future stretched wide and luminous, paved with sonatas, concertos, symphonies waiting to bear her name. Music was not craft, not duty. It was breath. It was marrow. It was the current of her being. Yet brilliance burns quickly, and like a candle devoured by its own flame, that light sputtered, faltered, and fell into darkness far sooner than it ever should. The ovations faded. The stage went silent. And Emma, once a prodigy, stepped off into a shadow that would not release her. The night her world broke was not marked by thunder or spectacle. It came quiet, ruthless, and final. A call, an accident. Her parents gone. 2 coffins stood in a room that smelled of lilies and despair, and from that day forward music no longer sounded like hope. It sounded like grief. Debts appeared like vultures. Letters stamped with red demands piled on her doorstep. Emma stared at the violin case lying on the floor of her rented room, its polish dulled by dust. The choice carved itself into her chest: keep the dream and starve, or work and survive. She chose survival. But in choosing it, she lost more than music. She lost the last link to who she had been. Her heart cracked clean as glass. And though she moved forward, serving strangers, her soul remained at that graveside, a girl clutching her violin with hands that no longer knew where to belong. She wiped tables until the cloth frayed in her hands, poured wine without lifting her eyes, bowed her head with every order, a gesture rehearsed so often it had become instinct. Silence was her shield. The less they noticed her, the safer she felt. Tips were her lifeline, coins and bills slipped under plates, the thin thread between hunger and survival. Each shift was a gamble, not in glory, but in whether her rent would be met, whether another week could be bought. The wealthy preferred her voiceless. They enjoyed the illusion that food appeared by magic, that glasses filled themselves. To them, Emma was air useful but unseen. Inside, she hollowed. Day by day, the current that once sang through her bones dried into dust. The violin in her closet no longer called. It accused. And as she moved through the restaurant, efficient, invisible, she knew she was no longer living a life, she was serving a sentence. He arrived wrapped in wealth like armor. The tailored suit clung sharp against his frame, the watch on his wrist flashing with each calculated gesture. His voice carried across the room assured deliberate dissecting figures that belonged to empires. $1 billion mergers fell from his lips as if they were casual anecdotes. His smile was sculpted for power-controlled, precise, edged with mockery. His eyes, cold and steady, measured everything but revealed nothing. The room bent toward him. Waiters quickened their pace. Diners leaned closer, eager to catch the spill of influence. Yet Emma, balancing her tray, glimpsed something the others did not. Behind the confidence past the polished veneer, she caught a flicker and emptiness so stark it startled her. A man surrounded by light, yet casting his own shadow deeper than anyone else in the room. He had not been born into this armor. His childhood was lean, clawing through scarcity with fists clenched and teeth bared. He learned early that kindness did not pay debts, and compassion did not keep the lights on. So he killed those impulses one by one, burying them beneath ambition. Each victory hardened him, each betrayal etched another layer of stone across his chest. Money became his compass, his shield, his proof that he had outrun the poverty that once choked him. He told himself he had triumphed. Yet triumph was hollow. His towers of glass and steel were monuments to a boy who had sworn never to feel small again. But in protecting himself, he had emptied himself. Now he looked at others as obstacles or tools dust scattered in his path. To Alexander, there was no music, no tenderness, only the relentless count of numbers that kept his silence intact. In the dimmest corner where candlelight could not quite reach sat a man few noticed. His suit was plain, his posture unassuming, yet his eyes burned with a brightness that unsettled when they lingered too long. He did not feast, he did not drink. He observed. Every gesture in the room seemed to pass through his gaze, the tilt of a glass, the curl of Alexander's lip, the tremor in Emma's fingers. And each observation was captured in a leather-bound notebook. His pen moved with deliberate weight, the words etched like judgments awaiting execution. Patrons bustled unaware of his presence as if he had cloaked himself in irrelevance. But nothing about his stillness was accidental. There was intent in the way he watched, as though the night itself had been chosen. Blake's hand paused, his eyes narrowing toward the table where arrogance clashed with silence. This was no chance visit. He had come for a reason. Emma approached with quiet hands, pouring wine as she had done 1,000 times before. Alexander barely looked, his attention fixed on his words, his empire, his control. But then his gaze slipped, caught hers. It lasted only a breath. Yet in that instant, two worlds collided. He saw, unexpectedly, a sorrow that did not beg for pity, but carried the sharp pride of someone who had endured. A mystery, wrapped in exhaustion. She in turn saw him not as the titan the room adored, but as a vessel emptied of substance, a man whose triumphs rattled hollow inside his chest. The disconnect startled her as though she had glimpsed a fracture in an unbreakable wall. The moment was gone as quickly as it came. Alexander dismissed it, turned back to his numbers. But a subtle truth lingered. He had brushed against something vital and let it slip away. From his corner, Blake did not miss it. The faltering of Alexander's gaze, the unspoken tension caught between servant and master. He lowered his eyes to the notebook ink scratching across the page, kindness buried, pride suffocating. His pen moved with quiet finality, as though chronicling more than an evening, as though recording evidence. Emma remained oblivious, lost in her duties, unaware she had become the subject of a stranger's relentless scrutiny. But Blake's attention did not waver. He tracked her small gestures, the grace in her restraint, the weight of silence she carried. In his eyes, each act revealed more than words could confess. The room continued to hum, oblivious to the quiet trial unfolding in one man's book. The story was taking shape line by line, though none at the table yet knew the verdict already beginning to form. The table for two became a table for one. Marcus, flushed with urgency, had hurried away to meet the birth of his child, leaving Alexander seated in the heavy silence of half-cleared dishes. Moments earlier, his presence had filled the room with inevitability. Now, stripped of audience, he appeared diminished, almost skeletal against the vastness of the restaurant. Power sat beside him, yet it could not touch the emptiness across the table. The leather chair opposite remained vacant, a mute witness to his solitude. Emma noticed in the space between pouring water and folding napkins. For a heartbeat, pity brushed her chest, then vanished as quickly as it came. Blake lowered his gaze, wrote another sentence with measured calm, the pen pressing into paper as if engraving alone, though surrounded. The air grew thick, pressing against shoulders, settling into bones. Alexander's empire meant nothing here. What lingered was not triumph, but loneliness made visible. Alexander broke the silence first. His voice, stripped of its audience, sounded different, less a proclamation, more a murmur to no one in particular. Eating alone. It never feels right. Emma's reply came quiet but certain. It isn't the worst thing. Sometimes being alone is less painful than being unseen. Her words cut through the air, soft yet piercing. For the first time, Alexander lifted his eyes fully to her, startled by the weight behind such simplicity. Curiosity flickered in his expression, faint but undeniable. He was used to deference, not honesty, least of all from someone in uniform. In his corner, Blake noted it carefully. Interest awakened. The pen scratched slow, deliberate lines. The table between Billionaire and Waitress, once a gulf, had shifted by an inch. In that inch lived the first spark of something neither of them yet understood. Alexander leaned back, studying her with a sharper focus. "Tell me, do you have dreams?" The question landed like a stone. Emma froze, breath tightening. Her hand rose, instinctively brushing the pendant hidden at her collarbone, the tiny violin glinting beneath fabric. She forced a smile, lips curving without life. "Dreams, everyone has them as a child. Now, I only hope to pay rent." But her eyes betrayed her. They shimmered with a truth she could not voice, a longing so raw it unsettled even him. He recognized it, the fracture between words and soul. Alexander tilted his head, intrigued, yet uncertain. For a moment, the fortress of numbers and deals faltered, confronted with a mystery he could not quantify. From the shadows, Blake's pen moved again. "A dream, denied, still breathes. Denial does not kill it." The evening had shifted. Emma's silence had spoken louder than her words. Alexander leaned forward, wineglass poised like a trophy. Numbers spilled from his mouth as if they were poetry percentages, margins, acquisitions, strung together with casual arrogance. His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to conquest, each phrase sharpened by wealth's edge. Yet the more he spoke, the thinner his smile became. It clung to his face without conviction, revealing the fatigue beneath the polish. Triumph recited too often had grown heavy, and even he seemed burdened by the weight of his own empire. Emma listened not with admiration but with a quiet clarity. She saw through the glittering figures, past the boasts to the hollowness they concealed. The man before her had mistaken statistics for meaning, profits for pulse. In the corner, Blake's pen scratched a verdict numbers in place of a heart. The words pressed deep into paper, a judgment neither Emma nor Alexander could yet hear. Mid-sentence, Alexander's eyes shifted toward another table where a young woman laughed brightly with her companions. His smirk widened. She has a future. More than you ever will." The remark was tossed carelessly, but its weight struck hard. Emma froze the tray, trembling in her hands. For an instant her face emptied of expression, as though her very self had been erased. She forced a brittle smile, lips trembling, eyes betraying the sting. The room went on around them, indifferent, yet the words echoed in her chest like a gavel declaring sentence. Blake's hand hovered above the page. He did not need to write. The cruelty was too obvious. Yet he noted it anyway, humiliation as weapon. Emma stood small before him, reduced by words designed not to question her, but to dismiss her altogether. And Alexander, sipping calmly, believed he had proven his point. Alexander's voice dropped lower, laced with disdain. "You're nothing but a shadow. You exist, yet you don't matter." The words sliced deeper than mockery. They erased her. Emma's throat tightened, her eyes flushed red. She turned slightly, the impulse to walk away tearing through her body. Freedom lay only a few steps behind her, but her feet refused. She stood rooted, trapped between shame and defiance, unable to move. The silence stretched every second heavier until it seemed the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. Blake's eyes lifted at last, sharp and unwavering. He no longer watched idly, his gaze fixed on Alexander with a clarity that cut like steel. In that suspended moment, Emma's pain, Alexander's cruelty, and Blake's attention collided. The next word, the next breath would decide whether the night descended into despair or turned toward something greater. Alexander leaned back, eyes glinting with mock amusement. His words dropped into the silence like stones into water. "Play the violin." "I'll tip." Emma froze. Her gaze drifted upward toward the instrument mounted on the wall, a relic of decor strings, likely rusted wood, dulled by years of dust. It was not meant to be touched, only admired as ornament, as forgotten history. Her chest tightened. She was not being offered a chance. She was being baited into humiliation. The nearby tables stirred curious lips curving into smirks as though already anticipating her failure. A few chuckled, whispering under their breath. Blake's pen paused. He tapped the notebook once a muted sound that marked the moment. His eyes, however, did not lift. He let the tension expand unchecked as if waiting for the air itself to fracture. Time slowed. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. The wager was not about money. It was about dignity stripped bare before strangers. And Alexander knew it. Her lips parted words fragile as glass. "I can't." The admission cracked the silence. Alexander's laughter came sharp, victorious, slicing through the room. Afraid to lose, then he pressed his grin widening. The mockery spread. A nearby table erupted in muffled laughter, diners nudging one another as though the scene were entertainment laid on for them alone. Emma's head dipped lower shoulders, folding inward, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her refusal was not weakness. It was instinct for survival. Yet in the room's cruel chorus it branded her as coward, as small. Every beat of her pulse seemed to echo their scorn. Blake did not move. His silence was deliberate, his stillness a note of judgment. He let the ridicule play out, watching how far the cruelty would extend before something broke. Emma's voice had faltered, but the night, relentless, demanded more. Her body stood rooted, but inside chaos tore her apart. Memories rose unbidden, her parents' faces in the front row, radiant with pride, the stage lights that once crowned her, the music that had been her breath. Longing clashed with terror. One thought screamed, "If I play and falter, I lose everything left of them." Another clawed back. "If I stay silent, I remain nothing but invisible." The war inside left her trembling, caught between life and death of the spirit. Her hands clenched, fingernails cutting into her palms. Her throat burned, breath shallow, as though she were drowning in a sea no one else could see. Tears slid down her cheeks, soundless, unnoticed by most. Yet each drop marked the fracture widening within her. The violin on the wall seemed to loom larger, waiting. Her heart knew the truth. Choice itself was unavoidable, and either path would tear her. Alexander rose, decisive, his hand reaching toward the wall. The violin, long reduced to ornament, came free in his grasp. Dust stirred as though the past itself had been disturbed. With deliberate calm, he crossed the space and lowered it into Emma's hands. "Give us some entertainment," he said, his voice low but merciless. The weight of the instrument pressed against her palms, heavier than stone. Emma stood rigid, unable to protest, unable to escape. Around her, the room leaned forward, breath stilled in anticipation. The silence was no kindness. It was the silence of a crowd eager to watch someone break. Blake lifted his face from the notebook. For the first time, his eyes did not hide. He studied Emma intently, waiting not for music but for the decision that would define her. There was no refuge left. The choice had been forced into her trembling hands. Emma raised the bow fingers, stiff lungs burning with panic. The first stroke across the strings came jagged sharp, a screech that split the air. Laughter burst instantly. Alexander leaned back triumphant, his amusement echoing. A ripple of chuckles spread across the tables, the wealthy savoring her stumble like wine poured too freely. Emma flushed crimson, her hands shaking. The violin seemed alive in her grasp, but not as friend, only as executioner. Her heart clenched so tight it seemed it might collapse in her chest. Blake's pen moved again, deliberate, unwavering. People delight in trampling the weak. The words scarred the page with their cruelty, a mirror of the scene before him. Emma felt stripped, her worth displayed and discarded before strangers. Yet somewhere beneath the humiliation, another force stirred: anger, memory, refusal. She was not finished. Not yet. She closed her eyes, drew one breath, another. The room mocked, but she no longer listened. Her fingers found the strings again, this time slower, searching as though reaching back into a forgotten part of herself. Images rose, her parents' faces, the stage lights, the music that had once been blood in her veins. With trembling resolve, she placed her fingers where memory told her they belonged. The bow descended. The sound was hesitant, quivering, but not broken. A warmer tone began to emerge, fragile yet distinct. The laughter faltered. Glasses stilled. Forks paused mid-air. The noise of the restaurant thinned until only her halting notes remained. Emma's body shook, but her music no longer did. A pulse of life had returned, faint but undeniable. Blake's gaze sharpened, the corners of his mouth tightening ever so slightly. He sensed it, the shadow was learning to breathe again. The sound unfurled into the room clean and fragile at first, like light spilling through a cracked door. It carried farther than anyone expected, sweeping across the clink of glasses, bending the air into stillness. One by one, movements halted. A waiter froze mid-step tray, suspended eyes widening. Diners turned their conversations cut short, every gaze caught in the net of those trembling notes. Alexander sat motionless. The arrogance he wore so easily drained from his face, leaving him transfixed, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to awe. His empire could command silence in boardrooms, yet he had never witnessed silence summoned by one soul with a boo. In the corner, Blake tightened his grip on the pen knuckles, pale. He did not write this time. He only listened, as though even words might desecrate the purity filling the air. The music spread, and the restaurant no longer belonged to the wealthy or the powerful. It belonged to Emma. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her arms did not falter. Each draw of the bow grew stronger, as if sorrow itself had become her strength. The melody sharpened, not delicate now, but searing, cutting straight through the silence like a blade against flesh. The notes carved open the room, exposing nerves no one wished to show. Diners shifted in their seats, discomfort mingling with reverence. For Alexander, the music struck deeper than he could defend against. His chest tightened, breath caught, as though the sound had found the hollow he tried to keep hidden. Emma's grief became weapon, her vulnerability transformed into power. The air trembled beneath it, not from weakness but from the truth made unbearable. Blake lowered his eyes, gave the faintest nod as if acknowledging the trial had already reached its turning point. The violin was no longer an instrument, it was judgment, passed note by note. The last sound lingered, suspended, then vanished, leaving a silence heavier than thunder. The absence of music was almost louder than the music itself, echoing in the hollow left behind. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a single clap broke the stillness, joined by another, until the restaurant erupted in applause that rolled like waves. The very same diners who had mocked now cheered, their eyes fixed on the woman who moments ago had been invisible. Emma's hands shook as she lowered the violin. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, as though she had run a race no one else could see. She set the instrument down carefully, like returning fire to its altar. Alexander surged to his feet, eyes bright, breath uneven, as if something inside him had cracked wide open. He had seen beauty stripped of pretense, and it left him reeling. Blake remained seated, pen resting in hand, gaze steady. He had known this silence would not last. The true reckoning was only beginning. The applause still thundered when Alexander's voice cut through it, unsteady, stripped of its usual steel. No one invisible plays like that. The words slipped from him almost unwillingly, yet they carried a weight that silenced the tables nearest him. For the first time that evening, his arrogance fell away, leaving his voice raw, almost fragile. His eyes, once cold mirrors, now shone with something he had not allowed himself to feel in years' respect. Emma shook her head slowly, refusing to claim what he offered. "I'm still just a waitress," she murmured, her voice steady but soaked in resignation. Around them, diners nodded, faintly captivated, not by Alexander's wealth, but by the fracture in his certainty. They sensed the shift the moment when power bent, however briefly, before truth. Emma turned to clear the table, but the silence she left behind pressed against Alexander like a mirror he could not look away from. Before the moment could dissolve, another voice broke the air. It was deep, deliberate, and carried no hesitation. This performance was never meant for one audience alone. Blake rose from his corner. The scrape of his chair against the floor sounded louder than the applause had. His gaze swept the room, solemn, unflinching, as though each face were being weighed. Emma froze, startled by the intrusion. Alexander frowned, confusion etched into his brow. The diners leaned forward, drawn by the sudden shift, breath caught in their throats. Blake's steps echoed with authority measured, resonant. He moved not as a guest, but as someone who belonged to the moment, who had waited for it to arrive. The restaurant held its breath. No one yet understood what he meant, but they knew instinctively the night had just changed direction. Blake stopped at the edge of their table and lifted the leather-bound book that had rested so quietly in his hands. The cover creaked pages, swollen with ink, each line a captured truth. He read aloud, voice crisp, unrelenting. He delights in trampling the weak. His eyes flicked to Alexander, unblinking. A second line followed, heavier still, a prodigy buried beneath an apron. The words settled on Emma, who stared back in disbelief, her breath caught in her chest. Alexander's face flushed color, rising harsh against his skin. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, no defense forming fast enough to counter what was already written. The diners exchanged glances, uneasy, electrified. Here was not rumor, not opinion, but testimony carved in ink. Blake snapped the book shut, letting the sound punctuate the room like a gavel. The evidence had been spoken. The judgment had only begun. Blake's voice cut deeper now, steady, unshakable. I am not merely an observer. I am the chief executive of the International Arts Foundation. The declaration struck the air like lightning. Diners gasped, murmurs flaring into disbelief. Some leaned closer, eyes widening. Others whispered his name, astonished that the quiet man in plain clothes bore such weight. Blake did not let the ripples settle. I wear silence to see truth. I sit in shadows to watch how people treat those without power. Tonight, the performance was not only Emma's. It was yours as well, Alexander. The words landed heavy, the twist undeniable. Emma blinked, stunned, as realization washed over her. Alexander's face tightened, his jaw set, but his composure faltering. The paradox was clear. The man who had seemed least important now carried the greatest authority. The roles had shifted, and the room once his no longer belonged to Alexander. Blake turned fully, his gaze locked like iron on Alexander. His finger pointed the gesture, deliberate, final. You are the one being tested. The sentence stripped the air bare. Alexander froze, his breath faltering. For the first time, his voice stumbled when he tried to respond. His authority, so effortless a moment ago, now cracked beneath the weight of those words. Blake's eyes sharpened, cold and relentless, pinning him in place. It was not anger that bound Alexander. It was judgment, heavy and immovable. Emma looked from one man to the other, her pulse quickening. She had known Alexander as unshakable, but now she saw him cornered, diminished, exposed. The diners held their breath. Tension thickened until it felt as though the very walls leaned inward. The shift was complete. The judge had become the accused. Blake's voice rose, measured yet cutting. You have money. You have power. But you lack humanity. The verdict dropped into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples through every table. The restaurant fell, heavy words suffocating the air. Alexander's head lowered, shoulders stiff. His hand trembled slightly as he clasped his glass, unable to steady it. The mask he had worn so effortlessly was gone. What remained was raw, unguarded. Emma's eyes lingered on him, no longer seeing the untouchable figure, but a man stripped bare, cornered by truths he could not silence. Around them, diners shifted with unease, some shaking their heads, others muttering in quiet disapproval. The scorn that once belonged to Emma now curved back on the man who had wielded it. The balance had tipped. The powerful was revealed as powerless. And in that reversal, the room felt a strange relief, a justice long overdue. Blake turned, his eyes softening as they fell on Emma. You deserve more than this, he said, his voice low, yet resonant. A scholarship, a place in the Young Artist program, a stage worthy of your talent. The words struck her harder than any insult had. Emma's breath faltered, her hands trembling as though even hope was too heavy to hold. Tears welled, glistening beneath the harsh restaurant light. Around them, the diners erupted into applause, their earlier cruelty washed away, replaced by admiration that now seemed effortless. They wanted to believe they had witnessed a rebirth, and their clapping crowned her as something more than invisible. Alexander did not join them at once. He watched her with eyes that had changed, eyes no longer cold but marked with regret, even awe. In that gaze, Emma saw not only a man undone, but one who yearned for what he had lost in himself. The offer hung between them, fragile as glass, promising everything yet demanding belief. Emma stumbled back a step, her head shaking violently. No, she whispered, voice breaking. I can't hope again. Hope already killed me once. Her hands shook uncontrollably as tears slipped across her knuckles. The violin felt heavier than stone, not gift, but curse. Blake said nothing. His silence pressed as hard as his voice ever could. His gaze held her steady, contemplative, but he offered no interruption. Alexander stared, bewildered, caught between admiration and helplessness. He had never seen someone resist salvation with such raw pain. The restaurant moments ago, alive with applause, now drowned in stillness. Diners leaned closer, caught in the suspended question, would she accept, or would she turn away? Emma's chest heaved, her breath shallow. Fear coiled tighter than any chain. The promise of tomorrow, once precious, had become unbearable. To reach for it again was to risk shattering into pieces beyond repair. Her refusal dangled the night over a precipice. No one dared look away. Blake's voice finally returned firm and measured. "This is not hope," he said. "This is the right you've always deserved. Hope can betray, but justice cannot." Alexander leaned forward, his tone no longer sharp, but pleading. "Don't give up. I will stand with you. You won't face this alone." Emma lifted her head, eyes blurred by tears. The weight of both men's words pressed against her chest, suffocating yet undeniable. Her heart raced, pounding as though it might break free. The restaurant seemed to vanish. Chairs, tables, strangers all dissolved into a single silence so complete it carried its own sound. Every eye waited for her decision, every breath hitched on the edge of her lips. Emma's gaze flicked between them, two men so different yet united in urging her forward. It was no longer about opportunity, it was about whether she could bear to live again. Her lips trembled, caught between surrender and courage while the room clung to the pause before the answer. The silence stretched taut as a string ready to snap. Then Emma's head lowered just once, a fragile nod that carried the weight of a lifetime. The room erupted. Applause burst like thunder, rolling from table to table, rising higher than any jeer that had come before. Strangers who had mocked her now clapped until their palms stung, as though they too had been redeemed by her courage. Blake's lips curved into the faintest smile, his eyes warm with quiet satisfaction. He had not forced her, he had only held a mirror until she found herself again. Alexander exhaled hard, his shoulders dropping as though a burden had finally been released. His eyes shimmered wet with something he had long denied himself. The violin in Emma's hands seemed different now. Dust still clung to its wood, yet under the lights it gleamed alive as if it had been waiting only for her decision. The nod had not only chosen her future, it had chosen theirs. Before the applause fully settled, the restaurant owner emerged, his steps slow but steady. In his arms he carried a violin case worn with age, the leather cracked from years of quiet waiting. "This," he said gently, voice trembling with reverence, "was my grandmother's. She always said it would wait for the right hands. Tonight I know it has found them." He placed it into Emma's arms. The case was heavy, but not like stone. Heavy like history, like inheritance. Emma's body shook as she clutched it to her chest, tears breaking free in sobs she could no longer contain. Alexander stood beside her. His head lowered, his face softened. He saw in her embrace a purity he could not purchase, a treasure no empire could replicate. The gift was more than an instrument. It was the confirmation that she belonged not to invisibility, but to music, to destiny, to herself. Emma wiped her face with trembling hands, then lifted her chin. Her voice, though hoarse, rang with conviction. "I will play again." The words cracked open the air. This time there was no hesitation, no fear, only clarity. Her eyes, once dulled by survival, shone with the fire of something reborn. Blake inclined his head, satisfied. His smile was brief, but his approval carried the weight of a verdict sealed. He had seen many rise, many fall, but in this moment he recognized the rarest victory, the reclaiming of a self once thought lost. Alexander's lips curved softly, his gaze gentle, almost tender. For him, her vow was not merely her salvation, it was also his own reminder of what he had abandoned long ago. Hope spread through the room, unspoken yet undeniable. It lingered in the air, in the stillness of strangers who felt they had witnessed something sacred. Emma had not only chosen music, she had chosen life, and with it the courage to never vanish again. Alexander's gaze lingered on Emma, then drifted inward, as if forced to face a mirror he had long avoided. His lips parted, voice stripped of command. "You've reminded me of what I forgot." The words fell low, fragile, yet they carried more weight than his proudest boasts. His eyes, once sharp with superiority, softened, stripped of arrogance. The mask he wore for years dissolved in silence. Blake did not speak. His stillness honored the moment, leaving room for reflection. The pause itself became an answer deeper than judgment. Emma inclined her head, a faint smile curving her lips. She did not gloat, she simply acknowledged the change. The man who had believed in numbers alone now stood humbled by something beyond his control, beauty, humanity, truth. And in that contradiction, transformation began. Blake's voice rose, first solemn, measured. "Never underestimate anyone. Greatness may live in the smallest shadow." Emma followed her tone, steady, luminous with conviction. My music is proof of that." Then Alexander added quietly but firmly, "Money cannot purchase this kind of worth." 3 voices, each distinct, wove together like notes of a single chord. Their words, layered and resonant, created harmony that no instrument could rival. The restaurant, once alive with clatter and laughter, now held only silence. Diners sat still, eyes fixed, the weight of those truths settling into their bones. It was not applause that followed, nor cheers, but a lingering quiet. A silence that carried farther than sound, etched into memory like an echo that refuses to fade. Now, the question turns to you. Who would you choose to become, Alexander the man blinded by pride, or Blake the one who recognized hidden worth? If you have ever been dismissed, underestimated, or silenced, let your answer be simple: leave a like. And if this story stirred, you share it. Let it travel beyond this room so that kindness is no longer the exception, but the rule. The choice lingers unresolved, waiting not in them, but in you.